Episode number 5 of the Law of Messiah. I'm going to do law number 49 up until 79. We're going to see how far we can go. Now, remember, the Law of Messiah is a completely separate thing that comes under the church within the instruction of the disciples. And you will see as they are writing in the book of Acts, as I illustrated in episode 1, this is how they ought to live. And so the law of Messiah is how we ought to live. And the law of Moses was for the Israelites. The law of Messiah is for the church. So it's very important we pay attention to what we are told by the apostles to live like. And so this results into the maturity of a Christian and their growth in the faith. If a person lacks in following this, you don't, sometimes people don't think of this as commands. These are commands. Okay, so without further ado, let's get straight into the other ones. If you haven't seen any of the other ones, I will leave a playlist down in the description below. There is at least 4 episodes already. So law number 49, it's from First Corinthians chapter number 10 verse number 7. First Corinthians chapter number 10 verse number 10. It's a command against idolatry. It's a command against idolatry. Now, in case you're wondering, how does it read? We'll go to it and it says it in this way. It says, these things took place as an example to keep us from craving evil things. You see, he notes that a human being in them has a craving that can go to falsehood. Yesterday, we did an episode on the IPHC when we were talking about DJ Cleo, and I explained this thing. There is a reflection in followers that is actually seen in the leaders. People follow falsehood because they themselves are in falsehood. Okay? Yeah, it's not just deception. There are people who crave it, as you can show, as you see it here, that they craved evil things. And then he says, do not be idolaters, as some of them were. He's talking about when the children of Israel built a calf. And you will notice there, he's noting a moment when the law of Moses was given in the old. So now we are given the law of Messiah. Don't be idolaters like they were, because we are not instructed by the same thing. It's not the same one. Okay? So right there you can see there are areas we don't need to go back into the old, which are directly instructed right here. Okay, so it says, as they sat down and they ate and they drank and they indulged themselves, basically. And so, so that's an example of idolatry and the issues that arise from idolatry. So, not to be an idolater is a law under Messiah as well. But law number 4051 actually extends that. Okay, it might sound like it's almost the same, but it is not. I want you to hear it. This is a law to be a follower, okay, of Christ specifically. Okay. Now, this you will get from First Corinthians chapter number 1, verse number First Corinthians chapter number 11, verse number 1. Yet be ye imitators of me, just as I imitate Christ. Now, so you will notice here, Paul references himself and then Christ. So there are people who are leading us, right? And so we want to make sure that people that we are leading us are led. We want to make sure that the person is guided by Scripture. And so it's a command to follow Christ, but it's a command as well to make sure that you are following people who are following Christ. Very important. Could not overemphasize that one. So, as you might think, okay, that's about it. I get it. To be a follower of Christ, Philippians chapter number 3, verse number 17 will also go along the same path. The next law here comes from Ephesians chapter number 5, verse number 1. This now is a very interesting one because that one tells you to follow, don't be an idolater, right? So that's the first one. And then he says, be followers of Christ as you watch your leaders follow Christ. In Ephesians chapter 5, 1, he says, be imitators of God, therefore, as beloved children. So you will notice here there is an issue, there is a need of knowing what your leaders follow so that you do not copy the wrong thing as you follow Christ. And then there is also a command to follow God as a child. He's speaking about innocence. Don't be tainted by falsehood that others have copied from God knows where, and you now bring it into your thing. And so you are imitated as children, as beloved children who walk in love, and just as Christ loved us and gave himself for us as infants. Okay? It's very, very crucial. So that law is a law to be an imitator of God. You cannot be that and allow falsehood. Now, this takes us on into thinking. Now, in doing this, it takes us to doing this following in faithfulness. So, faithfulness in followers, in being a follower. It's a separate command by itself. You'll get that from Hebrews chapter number 6, verse number 12. And how does Hebrews chapter number 6, verse number 12 actually speak of this particular verse? He says, we want each of you to show this same diligence to the very end. These are the disciples. They are saying, we want you to display this to the very end in order to make your hope sure. Okay, very interesting. To make your hope sure, then you will not be sluggish. So you will not be dragging your feet. So faithfulness is being called forward. Okay, but will imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what is being promised. Now you'll notice, you remember the previous one told us we follow leaders who follow Christ, we follow and imitate God. Now he says there is now a law of faithfulness towards that fellowship, or that following. It's a command to be faithful in that, okay? And that's from Hebrews chapter number 6, verse number 12. Now this takes me on to the next particular law of Messiah. Now, it's very easy to get swallowed by growth, okay? And our maturity. It's very easy. There is a verse here, 1 Corinthians chapter number 14, 1 Corinthians chapter number 14, verse number 20. Listen to this verse, very important. It says, but in the church, okay, in the church, I would rather speak 5 coherent words to instruct others than 10 in tongues. You know, nowadays, people Ravakashanda, they don't stop. He says, I'd rather speak words in which are coherent to another person. Brothers, stop thinking like children in regard in regard to the evil. Be infants, but in your thinking be matured. So he says there are certain things when appear stupid. You know, people talk about evil things and what and things that bring corruption to the gospel. It says appear as an infant, like as if you know nothing. So it's a command of the Messiah to be as one who knows nothing to evil. Nowadays, everybody knows everything. You know, no, the devil is doing this. You know that how? You know the devil, like I see the devil is doing. You know these things how? Okay, so we do not want to appear in our own strength of maturity. So as we mature with God, we must still appear in innocence to evil. It's a command of the Messiah, as the verse puts it there. As the verse puts it there, it says, in your thinking, maturity. Okay? But to knowing evil things, appear innocent as an infant. But in your thinking, meaning how you reason, evil things can't be spoken about, and then you're just like, hey, what's your business? Leave it to God. Hey, let God judge. That's your thinking does not reflect maturity. So it is a command of the Messiah to appear in maturity in your thinking. This takes us on forward to the next verse. Uh, First Corinthians chapter number 14. First Corinthians chapter number 14, verse number 20. First Corinthians chapter number 14, verse number 20. This is one that calls for understanding. Okay? Calls for an understanding. And how does this happen? As we practice ourselves in the word. Okay? It says, brothers, stop thinking like children in regards to evil as infants, but in your thinking as maturity. Okay? As in mature. You will notice he speaks about this when it comes to subject matters of speaking in tongues and instructions pertaining that. He says, but the law, strange tongues and foreign lips, I will speak to these people. But even then, they will not listen to me. And so it's very clear there what he is pointing towards, prophetically or otherwise. We ought to grow towards maturity and not be infants in everything. So understanding must grow. There are people who they are very good at listening to messages of pastors, but they have no way of reflecting maturity. The next law that is spoken about comes from First Corinthians chapter number 14, verse number 20. It's being a man of understanding. We've spoken about that. But in chapter 15, verse 58, he speaks First Corinthians about steadfastness. This is also a command of Messiah. The reason why people might not think of this because they think, okay, we grow and then we become steadfast. It's a command. It says, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast and immovable. Always excel in the work of the Lord because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And so, you don't need any explanation. Steadfastness is uh, being unmovable. It says steadfast, being unmovable. So what is the steadfastness and being unmovable whole thing all about? Is that a person like that is persistent, is consistent pertaining the work, negative, positive, what consistent, because you know the work is before God. Now we do God's work in faith. It's a display of faith. Okay? Yes. It's a display of faith. And so it's not like some sluggish work that you just throw whatever you throw. It's a display of faith the more we continue. There are people who don't continue. Okay? They are trying to convince others that they are being faithful. No, it's not about that. It's that you must come to a place where you know my labor is before God. Okay? So it is a command to be unmovable, to excel. He says, always excel in God's work. It's a command. That means you have what is sufficient. According to what God has given, you have what is sufficient to do so. So we're not called to be babies here in faith. We are called to excel in things. Okay? This takes me on to things. So being steadfast and being unmovable is one of the laws of Messiah. And then again, if you go back to the next one, it's pertaining that portion where it says, and to excel and abound in God's work. That's another law by itself individually. By the way, someone would wonder, Ricky, where do you see these things? You can go online and look the laws of Messiah, 1000 laws of Messiah. You will see this particular PDFs that are rendered out there where they are showing you the laws of Messiah individually. So to abound in God's work, we don't do one and then that's it. You see charlatans, you've noticed charlatans like they'll go and do a charity thing and then they'll post those pictures repeatedly the whole year. Why? It's not work that abounds. It's done for PR. They're not doing it because they have a love for the work of God. They do it to get PR. We abound and grow, or we expand and excel. Okay, so we must be very clear pertaining that. First Corinthians chapter number 16, First Corinthians chapter 16, verse number 13 is a very crucial one because it is a command. Yes, it's not easy. Things get hard. He says, be alert, okay? Be on alert, stand firm in the faith, okay? Be man of courage and strong. So life is not going to get any easier, but you ought to remember whom you are in service to. People are at home, I'm visiting as you heard, so if you can hear volumes, that's that. And so it is a command to maturity. Okay, maturity is a command in the law of Messiah. It's First Corinthians chapter number First Ephesians chapter number 6, verse 10 goes to that. Second Timothy chapter number 2, verse number 1, it goes to that. The next law is comfort. To be of good comfort. You know, there are people whose crying is a burden. You know, their crying is a burden. It makes it as if God is not there. He says, finally, brothers, rejoice amid for perfect harmony. Encourage one another and be of one mind. And he goes on and he says, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. And so this tells you how. There are people that love weakness. You know, weakness can be a part of a character of a person. A person can build their whole identity around weakness. Yeah. If you know what I'm talking about, there are people, you know, pity, pity becomes an identity. Yeah, that's not how God wants us to walk. Yeah. There must be a sense of maturity. Yes, things are bad. Yeah, but there must be a sense of maturity, of standing for what God has put before you. Okay? He says, I made for aim. He says, aim for perfect harmony. Encourage one another and be of one mind. Live in peace, and God of love will be with you. So, a peaceful mind, a peaceful mind. God calls for a peaceful mind. We're not to walk like kids. Now, if you go to Romans, okay, this idea of a peaceful mind is also part, okay, of the laws of Messiah. It's also part of the laws of Messiah. This idea of one mind. And how do we come to one mind? Doctrine. In case you're wondering, how does that happen? By doctrine. We must be clear what the doctrines of Messiah says. He says, rejoice with those who rejoice. Notice, weep with those who weep. People. There are people that eh, they have no timing. When people are crying, they want people to be happy. When people they want people to be live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but enjoy the company of the lowly. Okay, enjoy the company of the lowly, because remember, when you are there, not that you should be. It's that you are there as an uplifting, not in pride, as an uplifter. It says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. So that's the idea of a harmony, or living in harmony. So one mind is that we take our principles from the same place. Second Corinthians chapter number 13, 11 reflects that. Second Philippians chapter number 2, verse 2. Philippians chapter 2, verse 2 speaks of that. Now, in this idea of being in one mind, of being of comfort to those who are in mourning, of being a good cheer to those who are not cheerful. The Bible then brings up another thing, because there are people who will take that as a weapon: separateness towards evil. It is a command of the Messiah to remain separate from wickedness. There are people that do not understand falsehood and biblical things have no alignment. Therefore, so Second Corinthians chapter number 6, verse number 17. Therefore, come out from amongst them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch not unclean things, and I will receive you. This is very important. Separateness from falsehood will help those who watch us to know what should be separated. Okay? And that comes from doctrine. If our doctrine is not pure or clean, it will not allow us to mingle in areas of error. Okay? So that's very, very important one right there. So yes, to be of one mind, but there are people who are faulty in their belief, and we should not mingle. It can cause problems if we do so. This brings us to this brings us to a very interesting one here. A renewal of the mind. Okay, a renewal or an understanding of the renewal of the spirit here. A renewed spirit, or a renewal of spirit, an understanding of it. Okay, so an understanding of a renewal of spirit. This is from Ephesians chapter number 4, verse number 23. It says, to put off your former way of life, your old self, which is being being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be renewed in spirit of your mind. So it's a command to do that. So if there is no reflection of change, it can cause confusion. Some people can't even use it for reference, or they don't have a use for reference.